tonight is going to speak on another topic, Guan Yu or Guan Yu in Korean pronunciation, and why Koreans worship a Chinese tofu seller. So let's welcome Jacco with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much to Mr. Jung for the excellent introduction. And thank you for coming tonight. It's a very cold night this winter, so thanks for coming out. This is actually my fourth talk at the Royal Asiatic Society. So to any of you who have been before to my talks and have decided to come again, thanks for being so patient. That's very kind of you. All right. First of all, a word of apology. If you look at the printout of the summary, which was also the same as what's on the Royal Asiatic Society Career Branch website, I was careless in using the present tense, why Koreans worship a Chinese tofu seller. Perhaps careless or maybe deliberately provocative, whichever one sounds better. It would have been more accurate if I'd used past tense, which is why here in this title I call it, How Did a Chinese Tofu Seller Become Worshipped as a God in Korea? So, because these days, not that many people worship. But 100 years ago, or 120 years ago, it was certainly a lot more. So let's talk a bit about, first of all, defining my terms. What do I mean by worship? We've got this term here. It's a bit controversial to the word worship. Let's have a look at some of the words that are used in this discourse that I've looked at. We've got the Korean word sungbehada, which is from the Chinese, which is often translated in English as worship. We've also got chuanghada, to revere, to venerate, to adore, as in wanro chuanghadata, to be venerated as a king. Yeru, which is respectful treatment. Gyeongwaeshin, which is reverence. Boganhada, to enshrine. Patulda, and the last three words here are pure Korean words. Patulda, moshida, and songida. Patulda meaning to respect, to revere, to look up to. Moshida, which is often used with parents, people older than you, or someone more of a higher status, to look after, also to serve. And can be used together, these two words. So an example of moshi or patulda. And the last one, songida, to serve, to take care of. And this word songida is also used in the Christian context of to serve God. And so that's why I put it there as equivalent to sungbehara. It often has a worshipful intention. Now, all of these words are used in the articles that I read in Korean about the character that I'm talking about today. So, although it may not be the same kind of worship that people of other religions ascribe to their gods, nevertheless, it's in that vein. So, let's move on to a tofu seller. Here's a postcard of a typical late Joseon Dynasty tofu seller. He's got the jjigae on his back, and the blocks of tofu would be in there, and he's going around selling it. Now that is also a bean-curd seller, because tofu is another word for, or is the English transcription of the Japanese word for bean-curd. Bean-curd is tofu, and jangsu is a pure Korean word meaning a seller, a peddler, a trader. So this man would be a tofu jangsu, a tofu seller or tofu peddler. Now jangsu also has another meaning. With Chinese characters now, jangsu can mean a general. A military general or a commander. And here we see the Chinese characters there, jangsu. And there must be a pun there somewhere, because this person who I'm talking about tonight was both a tofu jangsu and a kunta jangsu. So he was a tofu seller and a military general. So the pun there could be perhaps the jangsu-cum-general. Pardon this pronunciation. Okay. So, who am I talking about? Well, he's got lots of names. Here's a picture, or a picture of an action figure based on him. The Chinese name, you'll see there the traditional characters and the simplified characters, which is transcribed in the pinyin mode as Guan Yu, and in Wei Zhao's as the same, but with different spelling. Korean, his pronunciation, oops, and that's a misspelling there. Look at that. I've mistyped that. That should be Guan. So, pardon my otan, my mistyping. That's Guan Yu is his Korean name. And in Japanese, Kanu, using a slightly different, simplified version of the first character. He has a courtesy name for a ja, which is in Korean it's Yunchan, or Yunjan, and in Chinese Unjan, which means the Un meaning cloud, from Wikipedia, which is apparently a likeness of Guan Yu. What we know about him is recorded in this book called The Records of the Three Kingdoms. I say it's a book, but it's actually many, many volumes, written in Chinese around 280 AD, and it's a record of that time when he was, when Guan Yu was at. So he was born into a humble farming family, around 162 AD, in the latter part of the Eastern Han or later Han dynasty. And in his early years, he said to have sold beans and or bean-curds, which is a title from my piece. And later, in Shuhan, one of the three kingdoms that was written about in the record of the three kingdoms, this chap came to serve Liu Bei, or Yubi in Korean, who was a warlord, a state founder, and the first emperor of Shuhan, right? So this is where we get from one type of Jiangsu to the other type of Jiangsu. Okay, so the bean-curd really was just an early part in his early years. He spent most of the rest of his life as a general working under this warlord, Liu Bei. Now, bear in mind, and you'll see here's Shuhan is over here on the map, quite far from the Korean Peninsula. These are the three kingdoms. There's no evidence that Guan Yu ever visited the Korean Peninsula. And as far as we know, he didn't even approach Mount Pektusan here to look over into the blessed land of Korea. So he's never come here during his lifetime. It's after he died that the story becomes interesting to Korea. So how did he become popular? This is still in China. We've got this Ming Dynasty historical novel called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. That's from around the 14th century when it was written. It's a novel, but it's based on the record of the Three Kingdoms. So it's more or less a fictionalized portrayal of the events from 1500 years ago. And the Guan Yu of this novel is much more famous than the Guan Yu of reality. It's where we get most of the details about who he was and what he was like. For example, come to Guan Yu's appearance. There's no description in the record of the Three Kingdoms at all what Guan Yu looked like. It's in the romance that it comes out. I'll read it to you. Chuan Dan took a glance at the man who stood at the height of 9 chi, or 2.07 meters, a bit taller than I am, and had a 2 chi long beard. His face was the color of a zao, or a jujube, a dechu in Korean, with red lips. His eyes were like that of a phoenix's, and his eyebrows resembled silkworms. He had a dignified aura and looked quite majestic. And you can imagine that any man who was 2.07 foot tall with a 50 centimeter long, almost 50 centimeter long beard, eyebrows like silkworms, and a very red face like a Chinese dame would be quite majestic. And he's also usually described wearing green robes over his armor. And this is why we see him mostly depicted as having green garments. Okay, so his status rises mainly after his death. So he was executed by a rival warlord, but it was in his loyalty and military fidelity to his own warlord, Liu Bei. That's how he became famous. So after his death, his rank began to rise. As I said, in life he was just a military commander, just a Jiangsu. But in death, he got the posthumous name of Marquis Zhangma. And about 800 years, 900 years after he was killed, during the reign of the Song Dynasty Emperor Shaozong, he was established as Prince Zhangmao Yiyong Wuan Yingji, with a whole bunch more Chinese characters. Unfortunately, you can't see very well on the projector, but you see that the name starts to get longer, and he's now gone from a marquis to a prince. Then Emperor Wenzong of the Mongol Yuan Dynasty renamed him Prince of Shanling Yiwang Wuan Yingju, which is almost the same, but he's changed a couple of the characters there at the beginning. So it shows he's popular not only with the Han Chinese, but also with the Mongol dynasty. The Ming Dynasty then saw him elevated to saintly Emperor Huan. So he's now an emperor, and he's saintly, ruling from the heavens. And the Qing Dynasty went further. The holy and august Emperor Huan, the loyal, righteous, of supernatural prowess and spiritual protection, whose benevolence and courage is majestically manifest. All that. That was his full title, which is quite a mouthful. So it was often shortened to Saint of War, right? Wu Song, a common powers title we see him, his name gets connected to war, and he's a saint of war, but he's also a bit like a god of war. So Guan Yu worship in China. Well, let's just look at the perspective here. We know that Confucius, of course, is very important in ancient China. So in pre-communist China, there were about 3,000 temples to Confucius. These temples were called Gongmiao or Gongmyo in Korean. And we have one of them here in Korea at the Songyunguan University. Now, there were 300,000 temples and shrines where Guan Yu was worshipped in China. That's quite a lot more, by a factor of 100 than the Confucian temple. Even the smallest village would have a shrine to him, and well-off families would have a corner of their house or a little shrine in their complex, which would be holding a portrait or a statue of Guan Yu. And in Hong Kong, it's interesting, there's a bit of irony here. In Hong Kong, the Triads, the famous criminal gang in Hong Kong that controlled the drug trade, the Triads worship Guan Yu, and so do the police, who try to cancel the Triads. So he's favoured by both sides of the equation. Now, what are these magical powers? What does he have to offer Saint Guan Yu up there in heaven? Well, at the Battle of Lake Poyang, and this is in 1363, part of the downfall of the Yuan dynasty and the rise of the Ming dynasty, was one of the world's biggest sea battles. Zhu Guanzhang led the Ming Navy against the Han Navy, one of the largest battles in naval history, on a giant inland lake, Lake Poyang. Zhu won the battle, and he became Hongwu, the first emperor of the Ming dynasty. The first emperor of the Ming dynasty. Now, Guan Yu's spirit is said to have appeared and helped Zhu to victory. That is, of course, to students of world history, this is not the first time that somebody is said to have appeared and led somebody in victory over another army. It seems to have happened a few times before and since. Now, the Yongle Emperor in the 1400s said that he had also been guided and helped by Guan Yu when seizing power from his nephew, the Zhuangwen Emperor, in a coup d'etat. So we've got at least two examples in China of where this Guan Yu has come in his spirit form to help as a guide. And this now brings us very close to why he became worshipped or revered in Korea. During the Imjin Wars, or the Imjin Weran, or the Hideyoshi invasions of Korea, in the late 16th century, so 1592 to 1598, Ming China sent armies and navies to Korea to help Joseon Korea fight off the Japanese. Now, there is some murkiness here. There's a couple of different stories that vary with each other. One of them is that Guan Yu's spirit helped Ming China in general. He just generally appeared at the scene of battles and led them into the charge and helped them to overcome. Other accounts, and these are Korean accounts, refer to General Qin or Jinin, and the online Shillok, the record of the kings, gives the Chinese characters as this, Jin Jangun, or Jinin, and has a story about him being wounded by a Japanese bullet at the siege of Ulsan, which is towards the end of the Imjin Weran, so 1597 to 1598, and then retreating to Seoul for treatment, and he was healed by praying to Guan Yu. That's the Korean version of the story, the official Korean version. The other version we have is that there was a Chen Lin who has two possible different hamcha for his name, who was a Ming admiral. He wasn't at the Battle of Ulsan. He was fighting in ships alongside Korean Admiral Yi Sun-shin at the Battle of Noryangjin, right at the very end of the Hideyoshi invasion, December of 1598. And it was he, this Admiral Chen Lin, who gave a eulogy at Yin's funeral. However, I can't find any account of him having been shot or otherwise wounded by the Japanese, or of having had a vision of Guan Yu in any form. So we've got three different versions here, and I can't find one that seems to be the authoritative version. I also looked at Sam Hawley's account of the Imjin War. Sam, a former member of the Royal Navy Society, and his book is up the back there for sale. Excellent book on the Imjin War. Unfortunately, he doesn't mention Guan Yu either, or the shrines that appeared after the Imjin War and devoted to him. So I imagine that this could be the missing chapter from his book, how Guan Yu became involved. So, Korean shrines. During the Imjin engine wars, the Ming soldiers who were fighting the Japanese, they erected the first shrines to Guan Yu as a guardian spirit or deity. And we've got them in locations as diverse as Seoul, Andong, Songju, Gojong, the small island off the coast of Choledong, Namwan, Dongnae, etc. We've got them in several different places. And these were the first Guanwangmyo. And there's another mistype in English. That should be a W, not a G. Guanwangmyo, the shrine to King Wan. So after the Imjin Wars, the Ming Emperor Shenzong and Joseon King Songjo agreed to join forces. When I say join forces, I mean here money and talent, manpower, to build a big and proper shrine in Hanyu. The name of Seoul. And so the first of these shrines, the first proper state-controlled shrine, was the Nam Guanwangmyo, what we call in short Nammyo, or the Southern Shrine. So here we see a table that shows all four of them. We've got Nam Guanwangmyo, which was established in 1598, so right at the end of the war. And if this date is correct, April 1598, then it was too early for the Battle of Noryang, at which Admiral Chen appeared. It would make sense for the Battle of Ulsan, or the Siege of Ulsan, because that was December 1597 to February 1598. So that could make some sense there, if that date's correct. Now, where was this? This was in Junggu Dodong Ilga, number 68. This is actually more or less across the road from where Seoul Station is today. What is now the car park of the Millennium Hilton Hotel. That is where the Nam Guanwangmyo was, the very first shrine. Shortly afterwards, just 3 years later, was the Dong Guanwangmyo. And that's over in Sungin-dong. And if you look at maps today, and I'll show you a map of it later on, what it looks like today, that is still the same piece of land. So Dong Guanwangmyo is the only shrine to Gwanwang in Seoul that is still at the same place. Still occupies the same little land. We've also got later on the Buk Gwanwangmyo, or the North Shrine, and that was established in 1883 on a site which was almost as big as that of Gojong, 2,716 tons. And then we've got one over in the west, which was Sodemungu, and that's almost the same size again. Now, two of these, the East Shrine and the North Shrine, both of them were in Gojong. I'll come to a bit about that later on. Look at these 2 dates, that's significant. Look at how late they were established. Right? We're talking about almost 300 years after the first shrines. That's interesting. So, as I point out, yeah, the West and North Shrines were erected during the reign of King Gojong. Guan Yu worship, this is when the folk religion, the worship of Guan Yu, became more important and more prominent in Korea during the reign of King Gojong. Perhaps, well, why is this the case? It could be that Gojong felt that with the opening of Korea, the unfair treaties, the arrival of Western nations, the Japanese fighting the Chinese for supremacy in Korea, that maybe it's because Korea was at a time of crisis, similar to during the Imjin Wars, and that's why these shrines were built to call upon Guan Yu to help, to lead Korea out of its crisis and into a stable period, such as happened after the Imjin Wars. And note that what's really interesting is that the last shrine, back to that, which was the one in the west, Sumi-myo or Somyo, the last of them was established in 1903, which is well after the Sino-Japanese War, in which Korea obtained her independence from Chinggis China. It's very interesting that they had a shrine to a Chinese god built in Korea quite a while after independence from China. And according to the records, Queen Min, the Empress Myeongsong, flew by the Japsan that are on top of the main shrine, because Japsan are always on top of buildings that were used by the royal court. So they indicate that Gongmyo was of importance. Now, just a few years ago, in October 2011, during preservation work, they found a very rare painting, which had been hidden, possibly for 400 years, behind a folding screen that stood behind the statue of Guan Yu. I'll show you a picture of that, the first folding screen. There's the folding screen there, which if you've been to a palace, you'll recognize his painting, the 5 mountain tops. called the Il Wol Omongo, right, which sits behind every royal throne. It's got the sun, the moon, and the 5 pigs. But behind that, so in 2011, they took this screen down because it had been hammered up on some nails. They took the screen down, and there behind it they found this painting, which is called the Gojong, which measures very big. It's taller than I am, so it's 2.75 meters tall and almost 5 meters wide, which features 1 white dragon, 1 blue dragon, and 7 yellow dragons. So it's a 9-dragon picture. Right? Dragons, of course, being symbolic of kings during the Joseon Dynasty, and it's the only one of its kind. And because it had been hidden for 400 years behind this screen, it's been basically untouched, A, by human hands, and B, by human breath, and C, by air around it. So it's in fantastic condition. Show you some pictures of it. That is the picture of the screen, of the painting behind it. Bless you. You see, here is one of the dragons. Here's the blue one. So, having found this painting, they measured it, they studied it, they took photographs of it, and then they put the old screen back in front of it again, so it's no longer visible to the public. So go to Dongmyo today. A, you can't get inside the shrine anyway, and B, even if you could get inside the shrine, all you would see would be the old painting, the screen of the sun, the moon, the 5 pigs. So all you've got is these photographs that I dug up from the Joseon Ilbo. Plus, anyone who's interested later on, I've got this book on the preservation work at Dongmyo, which is put together by Dongnobu Office, because Dongnobu Office owns the shrine, and there's some wonderful pictures in there of the restoration work they do inside this shrine. So these are some more pictures. So it's a great place to go, both if you're interested in the flea market, even if you're not, just go there because it's free to get in, and as I said, it's really quiet because it's not a touristy place. The fourth and last place I went to, which is Namgwanmyo, or the Nammyo, and that's now in Sadango. And you'll see on the map here, I went to Isu Station, took a mail bus, and then walked the rest of the way. If you can see at the very top here, this is where Park Chung-hee, President Park's tomb is. Right? So it's just over the hill from the Hyunchungwon National Cemetery. So literally a stone's throw from President Park is where the saintly god Guan Yu is enshrined. And it looks like that. That's my wife going inside. This is Nammyo as the Now, this is, again, as I said before, it's privately run and has been for over the last 100 years since the private foundation took over. So there's no touristiness here at all. You enter the shrine, the door is open, but it's not, I'll say the door is ajar. It's not wide open, it's not welcoming, but they're not locking you out either. So if you push the gate open, you can get in. And you can go inside, this is the main shrine building, but photos are not allowed. So I was not able to get any photographs of the portrait of the numbers and hangul written on the stone show when the thing was moved brick by brick, stone by stone in 1979. Right? You can just make it out there, but Ra 1, Da 1, etc. So there, no one bothered to wipe the chalk off when the thing was moved almost 40 years ago. Right? You'll see there's a residential house behind it. This is looking back at the gate from inside. There's another building there. I'm not sure what this is, but this one here on the left, this is where the caretaker's house is. Oops, there's no R there. Oh, the spelling mistake. I had to go to the caretaker's house and knock on the door to get the caretaker to come out and talk to me because, as I said, there's no explanatory signs there, so I really wanted to talk to somebody. And luckily, it was on a weekend, and the caretaker was home. He was having a nap. I woke him up, but he came out graciously and spoke to me for a while. Fascinating fellow. He's in his 80s, and he has ears with incredibly long lobes of the kind that you would see in portraits of Confucius or Buddha. I've never seen such lobes before. I actually was looking at his ear for quite a while, wondering, is that real? Fascinating. Anyway, here are the stones that have been taken from the original Nammyo. This one here says unauthorized access not allowed. So don't press that. This is actually the sign that says Jedan Bobin, so the private foundation. And this one, I can't read the bottom hangul there, but it says whether you're big or small. Normally, it's a whether you're big or small, get off your horse. But the last two characters are not get off your horse, so I don't know what this is. Maybe someone can tell me later on. I did say there's no sign inside the shrine or in front. That's true. The only sign I could find was on the very top of the mountain, behind the shrine, between President Park and the shrine itself. There's a nature trail, and this is an information board about not only Namyo, but about the cemetery and about a couple of other historical items that are of interest there up on the mountain. The caretaker's over 8 years old. His father played a big role in making sure that the shrine, the original shrine, wasn't destroyed back in the early 1900s. His father was part of the civic foundation that took over the shrine. And he told me that this job of both caretaker and lead worshipper, lead venerator of Guan Yu, was a position that had been passed down from father to son for many generations. So apparently his family had been doing it for several hundred years. But as he's now in his 80s, he looked reasonably healthy. I asked him if he had a son. He said he does, but there's no guarantee that the son will take over. And he said that's a question that we leave up to the foundation. So one wonders whether the whole thing might not just die when he does, whether the foundation even has the money to continue to pay someone to do these monthly worship ceremonies. He does still do monthly chairs up to Guan Yu inside the Namyo. But a very interesting open question. As I said, it's up atop the mountain. It's absolutely beautiful. The house is nice. I wouldn't mind living there for free for doing a couple of hours to Guan Yu every month, but they're not going to pick me, so. Okay, that's the inside of the gate. We've got the Guan Tongmyo, so the shrine to Holy Saint Guan. Now, we come to an interesting story. This is a story that I heard from the caretaker of Namyo. He said that there are different images of Guan Yu depending on whether he's alive or whether he's dead. The story that he told me, related to one of the three narratives I mentioned earlier, was Chinese General Jin was wounded. He was taken to Seoul, and Guan Yu appeared. He rose from the ground outside Namdaemun and flew over Seoul and went back into the ground outside Dongdaemun. And this is why, according to the story, this is why the Namyo was built outside Namdaemun, and the Dongmyo was built outside Dongdaemun. And the figure in Namyo represents the living Guan Yu, the Guan Yu rising out of the ground, and the figure in Dongmyo represents the dead Guan Yu after he's killed, going back into the ground. And that's why there are different colors, he said. So we've got this living image of Guan Yu, where the face is red, the clothes are green, and these are the pictures that we see of him, or the images of him that we see in both Namyo and Dongmyo, the north and south shrines. Right? That's the living Guan Yu. The death image of Guan Yu, this is the same statue I showed you before inside Dongmyo, but now he's wearing the yellow robes. Face and body of gold, clothes are yellow, the imperial color, because he's only emperor in death up in the heavens, not during his lifetime. In lifetime, he's a general, so he's wearing his general armor and his general's green robes. But in death, he wears the yellow. And only his beard is the same as his living image. And only the Dongmyo statue is like this. What the statue is like in Seoul, I couldn't find a record of. But what's interesting is that this is a story I heard, but according to the book that I've got in a PDF file, anyone who's interested, I'll send it to you later, it's all in Korean, the report on basic academic investigation into relics held at Dongguan-Wangmyo, quite a mouthful, put together by Jongno-gu office, they say that this is all a bunch of hokum. The appellations living image of Guan Yu and death image of Guan Yu are folk beliefs passed down from the 18th century, but this is not correct according to iconic basis, sculptural expression, or academically. Furthermore, in China, images or statues of Guan Yu are not distinguished in this way. So perhaps it's something that's only true in Korea, or maybe it is just a more recent folk belief that came up in the 18th century that didn't exist for the first couple of hundred years. So it's interesting. Now, how is it that Guan Yu shrines, once important and popular, have come to be so denigrant? No, you ask any Korean these days, most people have either never been to Dongmyo or they think you're talking about Jongmyo and mispronouncing it. Maybe it's because Guan Yu is a god that came from China. Maybe that's why he's not quite so popular. But, here's a question. Haven't most figures worshipped in Korea? and indeed most religions, come to Korea from overseas. Right? Not just Guan Yu, but Confucius, Jesus, Buddha, all of them coming from outside. So Guan Yu and the folk religion around it have come to be part of Korea's traditions too. They're not just China's, they're also part of Korea's tradition, at least the last 500 years, almost. But I did find this quote in the previous report that I mentioned by the Seoul Metropolitan Government. On the other hand, today, as China's campaign to revive Sinocentrism is growing, Dongmyo, enshrined the Chinese god Guan Yu, is also seen in an uncomfortable way. Seen from that perspective, Dongmyo and the relics held in it clearly have value as a weighted heritage. I had a bit of trouble translating that one. Anyway, weighted heritage, carrying the significant message that history must not be repeated. In other words, we must never have another Guan Yu foisted on us by the Chinese again. And that's something I'll leave you with, food for thought. I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
So, any questions?
Yes, certainly.
Ever since I discovered the Jacco many years ago on Namsan Mountain, facing towards downtown Seoul, I thought that was the original Namyo. I'd always thought for years, because it's just perfect location and it's very much the same. Can you tell what is the relationship between these shrines and the Jacco?
That's a good question. I think is it also not called the
Waryongmyo.
Right, that's up on Namsan. Yeah. It's in that particular shrine, it's not just Jacco, but also two other generals who fought under Liu Bei. You got Jacco, well, the Liu Bei is Liu Bei, he's the warlord, but there are two other ones, Chanbi, or Chanbei, and Guan Yu. So three of these generals are all enshrined in that particular shrine. I couldn't find as much detail about that one in what I was reading about, so it's not directly related to one of Guan Yu's shrines. Guan Yu just happens to be in it, but it's not a shrine just for him. But yeah, it's certainly one on a more extensive research. I'd like to include the Waryongmyo as well and look at how that relates to it.
That also has the Yellow Emperor and Dangun and Korean Sanshi in it, so it's a real, China-Korea combination of Taoism.
Do you know if they still do ceremonies there?
It's privately operated, and they have big people for worship. I don't know if they do large-scale formal ceremonies. I don't know. We should do another presentation on that shrine.
I agree. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Interesting presentation of the company, as far as I understand. But what I interested in is what particular topics you are interested in striving for master degree in university in Korean studies.
Okay, good question. My master's degree has absolutely nothing to do with this at all. My thesis will be written on North Korean comic books or graphic novels. This is just a side interest. This semester at Korea University, I've been studying as an exchange student at Korea University this semester, and so I took a class in the culture and history of Seoul, and so we were all told to go out and visit some place in historical area and do a report on it. And I was so interested in the Guan Yu story and the shrines and what happened to them and why he's been so well forgotten that I decided to do a presentation because there's very, very little written about him in English. Right? The last substantive thing that I could find about him written in English was a report a monograph written by a German professor whose name escapes me. He's now deceased, and I was not able to find either an online or offline copy of that report anywhere in Korea. There is, however, in the next days or weeks, a new paper about to come out about Guan Yu in English, which is completely coincidental, happens to come out the same month as my my presentation, rather. Here's the abstract. Scholarship on Joseon gratitude to the Ming in the wake of the Imjin Wars stresses Joseon loyalism and a nostalgia for a lost civilizational order, then only remnant as a final human outpost on the Korean Peninsula, standing firm before the tides of northern savagery. There was a very different undercurrent, however, in which the Joseon officialdom of the capital saw the Ming as irrational and culturally alien, if not barbarous, violators of propriety. This paper examines these tensions and contradictions through the construction of Joseon state temples to Guan Yu, known in his deified form as Guan Wan, at the close of the 16th century, and the roles the cult and its temples played as a discursive space in which the Ming and Joseon governments negotiated the nature and dynamics of their relationship. It sounds like something that would fit in very nicely to what I've been looking at, but it's not yet available online or offline, so I'll have to wait for that one to come out. Hopefully provide some more answers. Maybe we can get an answer about the Jegal, the shrine there at Wairyong. No answers there? Oh, right. We have someone who has actually read the paper. And there's no answers about Wairyong there.
Chinese do say that. It's not competence. So why
That's a good question. Okay, yeah, he's not a Confucian scholar, so why would he be enshrined? Yes, that's a good question. And why also would he receive a bodhisattva name? Because he's also revered to a certain extent within Buddhism. What I would suggest is that in Confucianism, what appeals is his sense of loyalty, propriety, morality, and ethics, and that slots into the Confucian values there. But he himself, he wasn't a scholar. He presents the military arm, I guess, of the Yangban, not the scholarly arm. But it's certainly a contradiction there, and an interesting one. Brother Anthony.
When John Carey Hall visited Seoul in 1882, probably maybe the first question there, he wasn't allowed to enter through Namdaemun. And he was escorted by Chinese soldiers around Namsan over the top. And he went down to Dongmyo, which was serving as the barracks for the Chinese forces.
Wow.
Did you know that?
No, I did not. In 1882, you're saying? In which year was the Daewongun kidnapped by the Chinese and taken off the street? I think it was the 90s. Okay, because I was told at that time, and maybe you know this as well, we were told that the Chinese were at that time garrisoned at what is now Camp Koina, that's Tom's old house, just north of Yongsan main garrison. So unless they were at both Gongmyo and Camp Koina, which is Guangdong, then I don't know how to account for that story. I'd like to read that.
He definitely says that.
Oh, God, have you got that written in your website? Oh, I'll go home and see it.